Navy Matters.
Welcome back here. I'm Rich Acritelli. I have Tom Spier to my left. We just got done speaking about his very substantial helmet collection, and we thought it would be interesting today to speak about Normandy and the American helmets that would have faced the German defenses along the Atlantic Wall and even behind the Atlantic Wall with the airborne jumps. So I have Tommy here to my left. We spoke about helmets that would have been used by the bombers, helmets that would have been used by maybe even the gunners. We spoke about naval helmets as well. And now we have this helmet here from his collection, and we're trying to kind of almost find our way towards the land.
This is a very early Second World War helmet. It's like called an M1 helmet. And World War II helmets to most people look the same, but if you look closely at them, they are different. So this helmet had something called a Hawley liner, and the helmet was probably made around 1941. The liner was problematic in that it absorbed water. So these things would disintegrate. So they're not that many good ones out there. This one's really beaten up. But it's real, and it is a Hawley liner. The helmet shells themselves evolved over the war. So the initial helmets, they had like fixed bales, for want of a better term. So these things are welded into place. And within 2 years, they started making them swivel bales, so they're no longer welded. They would like rotate, which I'll show you. In addition, the front of the helmets, the seam on the side of the helmet, this thing, they were welded in the front of the helmet. So this is indicative of a World War II Army M1 helmet.
So now when you're looking at that helmet, it was made in 1941.
Probably.
How many additional changes were there? Because that's so early for us in the war.
Well,
and even before we got engaged in heavy fighting overseas.
The most substantial changes were really the bales, the loops. The airborne had initially welded bales, welded loops that looked like half circles. So the straps had the ability to go sort of like this. That ended up changing. Then they towards the end of the war, they started putting the seams in the back of the helmet. So there are a bunch of different evolutions. In addition, I believe there were different manufacturers.
Sure.
Manufacturers of the shells, different manufacturers of the hardware for the straps, different strap manufacturers. So there are guys who just will collect M1 helmets, and they know a tremendous amount about the specific helmets. They're helmets that are being reproduced, so you got to be really, really careful. You really have to know what you're doing. And even if you really know what you're doing, you can never be completely sure. Except for this one, I'm sure, because it just looks too lousy to be a fake.
Well, it's older.
I'm sure it's real, and I've had it for close to 40 years at this point.
So now when you look at that helmet, it's amazing that the government looked at almost everything. Military planners, buyers, suppliers, right?
Yep.
Engineers, whatever you want to call it, they looked at the battlefield experiences and what worked and what didn't work. Was this considered a pretty good helmet for American soldiers?
I think it was. They continued using it up until the early 80s. You look at the Marine Corps in Lebanon, this is what they're wearing.
Wow.
Essentially, it was modified somewhat, but it's pretty darn close. This is sort of neat because it has the guy's name and serial number in it. And I think I looked him up on the VA grave locator, and I found him, but I really don't know much about his service.
Do you know where he was from or anything like that?
Somewhere out west. I think I got this when I was in Ohio, probably in 86, 87.
So 81 years ago, roughly right around this date, because June 6th was just yesterday, right?
Yep.
And what we're looking at is that you had about 180,000 soldiers that were lining up and getting ready to go on the ships. where Eisenhower had to make that decision to gamble with the weather, because what you're looking at is that guys like this were wearing this equipment and they were getting ready, okay, for that great crusade to go across the British Channel and totally dupe, Hitler, who was sleeping at the time, and they thought it was going to be at Calais and so on. And we had American kids, 18, 19, 20 years old, along with their officers, and then thousands more that were waiting in the different waves that were using what looks like a pretty relatively simple piece of equipment, but it saved a lot of lives and it helped a lot of Americans probably come home, I would think, right?
Yep.
So
you could cook in it, you could do washing it, you could do a whole lot of things with
you could probably shave too, right?
Yeah, sure.
Right? You put
Absolutely.
water in it.
Yep.
So, all right. So here is the next helmet. Okay, of Tommy's collection here.
This one my cousin from New Mexico gave me. And this has, if you look at the liner, this has a fiberglass liner, which doesn't absorb water. So it's a better liner. And
Does that make it lighter, the helmet?
I think it's probably about the same.
Same?
But it just doesn't absorb water. I mean, if obviously water has weight, but this won't disintegrate by getting wet. So these liners were used for decades. They were all different manufacturers. There's some guys who just collect, the different type liners, or at least are cognizant of all the different liners. The suspension system, the lining system, it's like a football helmet. I think they called it Rydell, the Rydell system. And again, this is a classic World War II helmet. It's very likely that a guy on a landing craft going into Normandy would recognize this as being the helmet that he put on his head. This also has the swivel loops, bales that I spoke about. These things move. These things move back and forth.
Is that beneficial if they move back and forth, if they're a little bit more flexible?
I think it's probably a little bit more comfortable to wear. This has the, it's like more comfortable, I imagine.
And do you know how many of those that were produced?
Millions.
Amazing.
Millions and millions and millions and millions of these.
What company would have made that?
I'm not sure. There are different companies.
Throughout America, right?
I think a lot of, I don't know if Ford, I don't know, maybe Ford. I don't think Ford made it, or I would have heard of that. But,
yeah, but those major companies retooled
Yep.
to make a lot of these goods and services.
Yep.
All right, so now here is another one that's a little bit different.
Yeah, this is the only reason I brought this one, because it has a net. So you look at the guys on the landing craft, they most of the helmets have nets. This is what the nets look like. This particular helmet has the, this is another modification. I'm not sure when this was done, but the one we looked at before, the strap, the fabric strap went around the bail or the loop. This has metal going around it. And this also has a ball at the end of the clip. So I think if there was like hard upward pressure, the helmet would pop off your head, which would render it safer to wear in the event that there was some sort of upward force applied. So your neck wouldn't get injured.
So now what is the basic reason why the net was used on there?
Camouflage.
Camouflage?
So you could stick twigs, sticks, whatever you wanted in it. This helmet does not have that, we were talking about the front weld. This has a back weld. So this could have been, I don't know if this was made during World War II or Korea or afterwards, but I believe they started the back welds in 44. At some point in 44.
You know where I think I could be wrong where I saw that helmet? Remember the film Kelly's Heroes?
Yeah.
With Don Rickles and Telly Savalas and Clint Eastwood, right?
Yep.
I think they were using this type of helmet for when they ended up going into that French town for the bank.
Wearing the nets?
Yeah, I think so. I could be wrong, but it looks very similar. So now this is another helmet. Seems like a little bit heavier.
I think this is pretty much the same. This is, the reason I brought this is that the airborne helmets, the paratrooper helmets, the guys who jumped at Normandy, they wore specifically helmets that were specifically issued to airborne troops. And the way that they're different is the helmets themselves, the liners snap into the helmet shell. So when you're jumping, the helmet shell and the liner won't become separated. So these have these little snaps. You see the snap. Snaps right into the helmet.
So now, who would have most likely used that helmet?
You know, guys from the 82nd or 101st Airborne paratroopers. Also, it had like a two-strap system. So the helmet liner snaps into the shell, and the helmet liner has like yokes. It's like an A, and it has a special chin strap that really grabs your chin, in addition to the regular strap that the regular Army helmets had. So it's definitely different. It's tailored for specific use. The thing, this helmet is of Korean War vintage. The World War II helmets were the way that they configured these yokes was different. This a buddy of mine got me from Ohio. This is in a book. I'm pretty sure, and he's pretty sure that it's a legitimate Korean War issue paratrooper helmet. But I gotta say, there are guys who reproduce these things, and they're very hard to distinguish.
Now,
At least for somebody like me, I wouldn't be confident in spending money on something like this, like a lot of money, because they're reproduced in such a way that they're probably virtually indistinguishable, if not indistinguishable from the originals, with respect to the rivets, the hardware, the fabric utilized, consisting of the straps and the yokes and everything.
Now, would have that helmet had a good rating amongst the guys that used it, the paratroopers that used it?
I think it's the same as the infantry. They're infantry when they hit the ground, basically.
Yeah.
I think the helmets themselves operate the same way, but the thing is, when you're going down to the ground, it's not gonna pop off your head. The World War II paratrooper helmets also, they had like a leather chin strap. Is that a leather strap there? Which would look.
Would it be this one here?
This isn't one. This is off a Navy helmet, but the straps, the chin cup looked like this. It was like, right underneath the chin. This is from a Navy helmet.
Now, that last helmet that you had, when Eisenhower was very concerned about the losses in terms of the air, sea, in terms of landing at Normandy, that him and, I believe it was Lieutenant General Walter Bedell Smith, Beadle, went out and visited the airborne. And a big thing for Eisenhower was to meet somebody from like Abilene, Kansas, his hometown. Yeah. Eisenhower, a lot of people don't know, like he was a great athlete. He played minor league baseball under an assumed name. He was a very good football player. They always liked Ike coaching like the Army football teams. So when he looked at Normandy, he saw it as almost like a big sporting contest with the different aspects pulling together, different countries, the different parts of the armed forces, different leadership. Anybody that was, a cook or a tailor to the one that was dropping the airmen off, the pilots, right? So he goes there and he's nervous about the losses. And you see these 18, 19, 20-year-old kids with mohawks and the face paint on their face there. And they're actually told, Eisenhower's going to be very formal with you and just tell him where you did your basic and what your job was. So you start answering even before Eisenhower says anything. And Eisenhower smoked like 5 packs of cigarettes a day, who was a chain smoker. One was down even before it was done being smoked, meaning that he was going to light it and put another one in his mouth because the stress was so great on him. And later had a huge effect on his life. So Eisenhower was put in that spot because he had the ability to see the big picture, but also get along with people, especially different nationalities, right? The French, the British, the Canadians, the Poles, and so on, right? So you see these young airborne, and they most likely had that helmet, and Ike is asking them, where are you from? You had a life before the Army, and you had a life before this. And he's actually talking college football with them, and what city you're from, and so on. And remember, Eisenhower was like one of those guys. Even though he would become a 5-star general, he was a kid from a large family, a poor family, middle America. If it wasn't for that West Point education, who knows if he would have gotten out of that town, you know?
Yeah.
He probably would have been, you know, a colonel in the local guard or reserve unit, you know? So your helmet is extremely interesting because you got that iconic picture, and those young guys are saying, don't worry, we'll take care of this problem that you have with Hitler.
Yeah.
And at that point, Hitler was, you know, taking his medicine that the quack doctors were giving him, and, you know, he was sleeping as the landings were going on. So it's very interesting because the amount that was produced, the young men that were jumping, and then you have Eisenhower who feared the worst because you don't know until it happens. And I think that was a huge relief, and they had all their equipment and everything. So now here's another helmet that you have. This is a little bit smaller. This is a little bit different looking. There's some holes and some leather with this here.
This is a tank helmet. So you look at the guys riding the Sherman tanks. This is what they're wearing. So this has, you can put communications equipment in it. This specific one, a lot of them have a stamp of who made it. Like Spaulding made some of them. I don't know who made this one, but that's what this is. It's I believe it's model 1938, and it has these holes so your head doesn't get hot in the tank, or hotter than it would if the thing was sealed up. I have one where it had been taped, and I was thinking maybe the guy taped it up if it was really cold, just to keep his head a little bit warm.
Do you remember where you got that from?
No, I have so many of them. I just I think more recently I started recording where I got them from.
Do you ever go to any like armor museums or airborne museums and you look at things that they have?
Yeah.
And in the back of your mind, you say, well, I have this at home. I have this in this spot.
Yeah, a lot of the time. I went down to Aberdeen Proving Ground. They had a great helmet collection years ago. That was another factor that got me interested. They probably had 40 helmets, including a lot of prototypes. And I thought 40 helmets was a lot back then. Now I have probably close to 10 times.
And that probably would have been a lot
much.
of artillery helmets, right, guys?
Yeah, they had like a mix. It was mostly it was a bunch of U.S. prototype helmets from the First World War, and they had a very nice overall collection. It was actually a great collection. I think it's in storage now. That's what I heard.
That helmet's interesting. Patton in the late 1930s came up with his own uniform. It was this ugly uniform with these like gold, like, you know, buttons on them, and he designed it himself. And you got to understand, Patton, you know, had a lot of money, and he only saw himself as being, you know, in the Army itself. Whereas Bradley and Eisenhower were taking furniture out of their dump and refinishing it, and they were glad to be having a military job and having to pay and so on. Patton didn't necessarily need to do that. He came from a very wealthy family, and his wife was a lot wealthier than he was. And he came up with this uniform, and he called himself the Green Hornet. And it was one of these helmets.
The same type helmet?
Yeah, and then later, Creighton Abrams, who Patton said the only better tank man in Europe than me is Creighton Abrams, and he'd end up dying later on as the Army Chief of Staff of cancer, and he ended up liberating Bastogne. So he would have probably wore something like this that looks like a football player would have wore this, right? And Abrams was like a short, stocky guy, and he was a very physical guy, whereas Patton, you know, looked like, you know, Buck Rogers or like Captain America or something, whereas Abrams, you know, he played football and he was a tough character and stuff like that. And although you have all this technology, it still goes back to some of the things that Americans were familiar with. Yeah. You know, like wearing helmets that they might have used in sports or, you know, something of that nature, because you just don't have that technology for the testing years ago.
You know, interestingly, most of this thing's made out of leather, sort of like a football helmet. And, you know, it's just something you don't see anymore, right?
The air with the holes is a pretty interesting.
Yep. It's inside. It's all leather.
Because
I'm not sure what this is. This is some sort of fiber, the top.
Because our armor was very limited during World War I. We used a lot of the French Renault tanks there. Eisenhower trained those in Camp Colt outside of Gettysburg.
Yep.
And the war ended and he thought he was cursed. And then we were an isolationist country for 20 years where nobody wanted to do, especially during the Great Depression, which dictated our foreign policy. And then for them to come up with these things is pretty amazing that they, you know, were able to determine like those holes in terms of getting too hot in the middle of tanks and stuff like that, you know. But is there something that is pretty startling when you look at this helmet compared to things that are made today for tankers, for armor?
They're pretty similar in a way. I mean, as far as function goes, they have communications, ports, and abilities, capacities. So, and it's really not to provide ballistic protection as much as to prevent your head from getting injured by banging around in the tank.
Now,
that's my take on it anyway.
Were better helmets made during the course of the war because armor played such a huge role on the ground?
You know, I think they also made some helmets that look sort of like football helmets, like literally they look like football helmets. I think they were used by tankers. They have a Spaulding model that came from that. It really looks like a football helmet, but has the ability to take electronic communications.
And that's somewhat similar with some of the leather parts to it, right?
Yeah. I mean, it literally looks like a football helmet. And it says Spaulding on it, but it's a military helmet.
And that's a pretty durable helmet?
I imagine.
Yeah.
Probably could get banged around. I have some of them, they were decommissioned in the 50s, and I have one that has the tag. So it was in use for, I don't know, 10, 15, 10 years probably.
What year would have this helmet been?
Anywhere from 1937 up until probably the 50s. But
wow.
I have a feeling that's a World War II one.
Wow. Pretty amazing.
They actually reproduce them now. So a lot of these helmets, when I started collecting, there were no reproductions generally, but now a lot of the stuff's being reproduced. But you should be able to tell the difference with a reproduction pertaining to something like this as opposed to I don't know, something you got to be careful with.
Why were there no reproductions? Because there was such a surplus of them that were just.
I think so. I assume so. Plus, people really weren't interested.
Yeah.
World War II wasn't that far away. It was like your father's war.
Yeah.
You weren't really, kids growing up in the 50s and 60s probably weren't terribly interested in their father's war.
And they want to get back to a sense of normalcy, right?
It was so close in time.
Yeah.
But now these things are becoming rare. I mean, what used to cost, $5 can cost a couple $100 now.
You know what's interesting about this helmet right here is that even though Long Island's a very small place, it's a speck on the map. That how many Long Islanders might have worn this helmet during World War II. Yep. And then they came back to towns like Levittown and went to colleges here that were, GI Bill that utilize these types of helmets overseas. Absolutely, or down south training. So now you have another piece right in front of you.
Yeah, these are like flak goggles. And these would be worn, I don't know if guys would really even wear them, but they were made to be worn, the guys in the aircraft, to prevent splinters from hitting your eyes. It was a great idea, but it would probably impede your vision somewhat. So I don't know how. I've never seen a photograph of anybody wearing them in combat. Have you?
No, you see wild things, but that's the thing. So many different items were made.
It's like little pads.
Yeah.
On the inside.
Almost looks like 1980s, like what was that, Max Headroom or something like that would wear something like that.
These are legit.
Yeah.
This is like a real thing. It's just, I just can't imagine
what the vision would be like in the middle of fighting and everything.
So again, I mean, these things have to be practical. They're not going to help you unless you wear them, and you're not going to wear them if they impede your vision or they're too heavy, hurt your neck.
Wow. Okay. All right. So we're going to come back with Tom with some of his German helmets. So the helmets that we just saw now were on, let's say, on land, air, and at sea in terms of going up against the German enemy that was, in the Atlantic Wall and, some of those defenses that Hitler did not think that the Allied forces could get through. So come back, and we have some great military artifacts here that are going to be extremely interesting.